I don't need to destroy anyone. In Hollywood, just not bowing your head is enough to make them want to bury you alive.
I have never harmed anyone. Yet in Hollywood, there are as many as 7 people who swore they would never want to see my face again. In an interview with Barbara Walters, broadcast on ABC in June 1979, just 1 year before Steve McQueen passed away, he candidly admitted this himself. Among those 7, one had once been his closest friend, someone who shared nearly a decade of loyalty and companionship with McQueen. Another was a powerful leading actress who ended up hospitalized after suffering an emotional breakdown caused by one of McQueen's cutting and merciless remarks at a party. And the remaining 4 were all legendary figures in their own right, each harboring a deep and bitter resentment toward him, loathing him to the very core. So what exactly had happened? What did Steve McQueen truly do that drove them to such absolute estrangement? And why were they so determined to turn their backs on him? The answers are about to be revealed right here. 1. Paul Newman, jealousy. That shattered the friendship between 2 stars. From the very beginning, Hollywood saw Paul Newman and Steve McQueen as 2 opposite extremes, yet both carried a strange and irresistible allure. Newman was the sophisticated gentleman with deep blue eyes, like the ocean-calm composure and refined elegance reminiscent of a fine-aged French wine. McQueen, on the other hand, was a raging fire of rebellion, gritty, instinctive, wild, and explosive like a daring drift on the Daytona racetrack. Many believed the 2 could complement each other perfectly and become the golden duo of American cinema. But reality proved otherwise. They were more like 2 poles of the same magnet, forever repelling each other because at their core, they were simply too much alike. In May 1967, at the Beverly Hills Hotel during an exclusive gathering of Hollywood's top stars organized by Paramount, the entire room fell silent when Steve McQueen walked in nearly 20 minutes late. He said nothing, calmly puffed on a half-burned Cohiba cigar, and sat directly across from Newman, who was dressed in a white Dior tuxedo holding an expensive glass of Bordeaux. Journalist Ronald Fester, then covering the event for the Los Angeles Times, later recalled in his memoir, "The way McQueen looked at Newman wasn't just ordinary envy. It was the look of someone who had once been betrayed, stripped of trust, stabbed in the back. A gaze as cold as steel. That resentment did not come out of nowhere." According to documents leaked from Warner Brothers in 1993, McQueen had originally been the first choice for the lead role in Cool Hand Luke, 1967. Yet, just 2 days after Newman learned of this, he invited director Stuart Rosenberg and the production head to his mansion in Westport, Connecticut. The dinner included bottles of Chateau Lafite Rothschild 1959, and Newman's wife, actress Joanne Woodward, was also present. 3 days later, McQueen's contract was abruptly canceled, without a single explanation. From that moment, McQueen swore he would never again allow his name to appear beneath Newman's on any movie poster. When Fox approached him to star in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid 1969, McQueen immediately set a condition. "My name must come first. Bigger, higher. If not, then there's nothing more to discuss." Fox refused, and the role went to Robert Redford. The film became a huge success. McQueen remained silent. But 6 months later, Joanne Woodward unexpectedly received an anonymous letter containing a photo of Newman with actress Lee Remick, his co-star in a new film, accompanied by a taunting note. "This is exactly the kind of supporting role your husband enjoys most." The press later widely believed that McQueen had hired paparazzi to capture the moment and send the letter. By then, their rivalry had escalated beyond fame. It had become a war of destruction. In 1973, both signed on for the blockbuster The Towering Inferno. On paper, it was hailed as the Hollywood dream, but behind the scenes, it turned into a nightmare for the producers. McQueen demanded his own lawyer solely to count the number of lines. "I won't let him have even one more word than me." Newman retaliated by hiring a second cinematographer, just to ensure the lighting highlighted his face more prominently than McQueen's in every shot. A Cold War ensued over screen time, the length of shots blocking positions, and even trivial details like who stepped out of an elevator first. Warner Bros. Was forced to hire a neutral mediator who had once worked at the United Nations to prevent the feud from erupting into chaos. On March 11, 1974, while filming a scene on the 65th floor of the model skyscraper, McQueen deliberately slammed a door just as Newman stepped out. Newman slipped, fell hard on the steel floor, and hit his head so severely he lost consciousness. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital where doctors diagnosed him with a mild concussion. When the police arrived, McQueen casually exhaled cigar smoke and said, "Just an accident. Hollywood is full of idiots." Newman refused to let it go. He filed a lawsuit against McQueen for intentional assault. The case dragged on for 7 months, making headlines in hundreds of articles, and eventually concluded with a secret settlement. According to Vanity Fair, the rumored figure exceeded $100,000, along with a stipulation that McQueen was not allowed within 50 meters of Newman unless a third party was present. From then on, the two legends cut ties forever, never to face each other again. On November 7, 1980, Steve McQueen died of cancer in Juarez, Mexico. 3 days later, while filming Fort Apache, the Bronx in Brooklyn, Newman was asked by a Time reporter, "Do you plan to attend Steve McQueen's funeral?" Newman looked up, his eyes utterly unmoved. "I don't think I should bid farewell to someone who once tried to push me down just to climb higher. Kindness is not meant for everyone. And if you believe that only men hated Steve McQueen, just wait." Elizabeth Taylor, the most powerful icon of Hollywood at the time, placed McQueen on a global blacklist over a single careless remark. The result was that he was banned outright from Cannes and McHugh. To Elizabeth Taylor, just one sarcastic remark and they turned their backs forever. Everything began on a dazzling night at the Bel Air Mansion, 1357 Stone Canyon, right after the Golden Globe Awards of 1971 had concluded. The post-ceremony party, sponsored by MGM, was supposed to be nothing more than an occasion for the stars to unwind, raise their glasses, and celebrate after a busy year. Yet no one could have imagined that on that very night, a remark that sounded like nothing more than a careless joke would mark the end of the relationship between the queen of the silver screen, Elizabeth Taylor, and the rebel king, Steve McQueen. Elizabeth entered the party as if Cleopatra herself had stepped out of history. The dark violet gown designed exclusively by Givenchy hugged her figure and crowned her presence like a soft yet regal diadem. In her hand, she gently swirled a martini crafted by the mansion's personal chef. By her side was Richard Burton, her great love, and at that time her husband for the second time, his gaze silent but filled with caution. And then, shattering the elegance of the room like a gust of smoke, Steve McQueen arrived. Nearly an hour late, he offered no apology, acknowledged no one, and walked in as though the mansion belonged to him. Draped over his shoulders was a faded leather jacket in his hand, a half-burned cigar, and at his side, Barbara Lee, the fiery model who had once been romantically linked with both Elvis Presley and Warren Beatty. At the moment, Elizabeth was turning her back to pour herself a drink. McQueen stepped up behind her. His voice was flat-tinged with alcohol, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You don't need to put on an act anymore. Everyone knows that Oscar came because you slept with Burton, not because of your acting talent." The room froze as if time itself had stopped. The glass in Elizabeth's hand slipped and shattered on the floor, breaking apart along with his insult. Richard Burton jolted forward, ready to react, but Elizabeth raised her hand to stop him. She did not scream, nor did she let her anger erupt. She simply said coldly, "For someone like that, I don't need to raise a hand, but I will make sure he pays, and it won't be with a punch." And she kept that vow. The very next morning, The Hollywood Reporter released an exclusive article titled, "Steve McQueen and His History of Insulting Famous Women." The piece quoted a string of McQueen's disparaging remarks about women from 1965 to 1971, including lines such as, "Women should only be decoration," or "If women direct films, they'd be better off shooting gas stove commercials." Some of these quotes were distorted, and some were outright fabrications, yet strangely, no one came forward to deny them. There was no response from any lawyer, no retraction issued. And of course, everyone knew Elizabeth Taylor was a close friend of Janet McDougal, the powerful editor-in-chief of The Hollywood Reporter at the time. But it didn't stop at the press. 3 weeks later, McQueen received a letter from the Academy informing him that his name had been removed from the short list of Oscar nominees for 1972 for his role in Junior Bonner. The reason given was vague negative community feedback. The odd thing was that very performance had previously been praised in prestigious film journals such as Sight and Sound and Variety. An insider later revealed that there had been strong pressure from high-ranking female members, one of whom was running for vice president that year. That person was none other than Elizabeth Taylor, and the obstacles kept coming. In May 1972, the Cannes Film Festival removed McQueen from its list of honorary guests, despite the fact that he had been honored there back in 1966. According to leaked records from Le Monde, the jury had received an anonymous letter stating, "The presence of Steve McQueen will undermine the artistic value of Cannes. He is nothing more than a disorderly man in a tuxedo." The author was never confirmed, but the French press quickly connected a detail. Elizabeth Taylor was then an honorary member of the International Film Council, while simultaneously campaigning for a leadership role at the Academy. Still, the most bitter blow was yet to come. In 1973, director Fred Zinnemann invited McQueen to star in The Day of the Jackal. It was a golden chance for him to reclaim his reputation. But only 4 days later, Zinnemann received a 3-page handwritten letter from critic Rex Reed describing McQueen as unstable, crude, often insulting to his female co-stars and divisive on set. The ironic part was that Rex Reed's podcast, Hollywood Unfiltered, known for exposing celebrities, was sponsored by none other than Elizabeth Taylor. The role eventually went to Edward Fox. McQueen was never given an explanation. His career spiraled downward, and McQueen became increasingly difficult to manage. In February 1974, during an interview on CBS Late Night, when asked, "Is there a role you regret losing?" he gave a bitter smile, looked straight into the camera, and replied, "Of course." The roles Elizabeth Taylor bought outright. With just a few phone calls, believing he could still stage a comeback, McQueen tried producing the film Tom Horn in 1979. But Columbia Pictures, the main distributor, suddenly canceled the contract. The reason, a collective protest letter from a group of veteran Hollywood actresses condemning McQueen as unfit for the industry's new spirit. Among the signatories were Jane Fonda, Shirley MacLaine, Ellen Burstyn, and inevitably Elizabeth Taylor. By that point, every door had closed on him. On November 7, 1980, McQueen drew his final breath in Mexico after a long battle with cancer. Many former colleagues sent condolences, and a few attended his funeral. Elizabeth, however, did not. When asked if she would pay her respects to the man who had once humiliated her so publicly, she simply lifted a glass of red wine and answered slowly. If he thought a simple apology was enough to erase what a man once said publicly to disgrace a woman, then clearly he never truly understood what a woman is. And if you think Elizabeth Taylor was the only one powerful enough to put Steve McQueen in his place, you would be mistaken. The next figure was another legend, and the only person who ever dared slap McQueen across the face in front of more than 20 people on set over a whispered remark about the very woman they both loved. 3. Marlon Brando, 2 men clashing over a single woman. Everything began on a late October night in 1971 at the premiere of Clute held at the Westwood Village Theater. All of Hollywood had gathered in an atmosphere overflowing with dazzling lights and the scent of expensive perfume. While people were still buzzing about Jane Fonda, suddenly every gaze on the red carpet was pulled toward a couple stepping out of a sleek black Mustang, Barbara Lee and Steve McQueen. Barbara wore a deep red silk dress, the back cut daringly low to reveal a small tattoo just beneath her shoulder blade, a mark that, according to Playgirl magazine, only McQueen knew the true meaning of. Her eyes were as sharp as blades, her half-smile at once alluring and indifferent, drawing every camera in the crowd toward them. And at that very moment, another pair of eyes was watching from the shadows behind the curtain. It was Marlon Brando standing in the dark, a Cuban cigar between his fingers, his gaze as cold as Vito Corleone's in The Godfather. A longtime friend who was there recalled Marlon turned to me, smirked, and said, "That girl shouldn't be with Steve. I'm going to take her and make him feel what it's like to be stolen from." Unfortunately, Brando was not the kind of man to make idle threats. Just a few days later, his campaign began. There were no flashy invitations to dinner, no attempts to draw media attention. Instead, Brando sent flowers without a name to Barbara's room, arranged accidental meetings at Musso and Frank during lunch breaks, and left handwritten notes on her windshield, sometimes just a few words like, "You looked lonely last night." Barbara began to waver, but McQueen was far from naive. A restaurant receipt from El Coyote found inside Barbara's handbag with the signature MB was all he needed to realize that this was no longer a harmless game. 1 week later, McQueen abruptly walked off the set of Junior Bonner and drove nearly 40 minutes straight to Brando's house on Mulholland Drive unannounced. They came face to face in the front yard while Brando was feeding his dogs. Steve stepped forward, blunt and direct. "You're hitting on Barbara, aren't you?" Brando bit down on his cigar, exhaled slowly, and locked eyes with McQueen. "She doesn't belong to anyone. But if she did, it sure as hell wouldn't be you." No one knew who threw the first punch, but the outcome was plain Brando with a split lip, McQueen with a broken pinky finger, and blood smeared across the steps witnessed by 3 gardeners and 1 personal assistant. The shouting was so vicious that a neighbor called the police, though both men had left before the patrol car arrived. 3 days later, Brando appeared arm in arm with Barbara at a charity gala in Beverly Hills. The press erupted. The next morning, the front page of Hollywood Now blared the headline, "Steve McQueen, the cold lover and backstage bully." The article offered no solid evidence, only a flood of anonymous accusations, including claims that McQueen smashed furniture, threw liquor bottles at female co-stars, and forced Barbara to abandon roles because she was too sexy. Rumors spread faster than truth. McQueen immediately hired lawyer Martin Singer and began preparing a lawsuit against Brando for defamation and character sabotage. But before he could file it, an envelope arrived in his mailbox, a photo of Barbara and Brando embracing in a suite at the Chateau Marmont dated December 18, 1971. McQueen said nothing. Hours later, he smashed his bathroom mirror with his bare hand. His assistant later recalled that he muttered only one sentence: "Marlon slept with her not out of love, but just to hurt me." And he won. Refusing to stay silent, McQueen struck back. He leaked to the press that Brando had once paid Confidential magazine to fabricate scandals, especially those involving actress Rita Moreno, who had turned to sleeping pills after repeated betrayals by Brando. But this time, the press no longer cared about the truth. They had already chosen sides, and the winning side belonged to the man more charming, more enigmatic, and better connected, Marlon Brando. At that very moment, a handwritten letter from Barbara Lee was leaked to Screen Week. In it, she wrote, "Steve, you control me as if you were driving a car. You want me to speed up when you please, to stop when you get angry. But I am not that car. I am a human being, and I am exhausted from being controlled." Those words cut the final thread between McQueen and Barbara, and between the two men who once stood among the most powerful names in Hollywood. When asked months later about the possibility of working with McQueen in the future, Brando smirked and answered coldly, "I'd rather share the screen with a crocodile in the Everglades." From that point on, McQueen rejected every script that included Brando. When director Sam Peckinpah tried to mediate and suggested a joint project, McQueen's response was blunt. If Marlon is on the casting list, I won't sign, even if it's just for an extra role. Barbara Lee virtually vanished from the media for nearly 2 decades after the incident. But in 1994, during a rare interview with Vanity Fair, when asked who she would choose if she could go back to 1971, Barbara answered with words light as air but sharp as a blade. One man treated me as property. The other wanted me to surrender on his terms. Neither of them loved me. They only loved winning. And so ended a friendship, a romance, and a dark chapter in Hollywood's backstage history. Yet, if Marlon Brando wielded seduction and quiet schemes to strike back at McQueen, John Wayne would choose a different path. He did not fight over women, nor resort to violence, but he despised Steve McQueen with everything he believed embodied the truth of a real American man. For John Wayne, 2 opposing definitions of a man. Hollywood in 1971 was stretched taut like a violin string pulled to its breaking point. One wrong word could shake the entire foundation of American cinema. On one side stood John Wayne, the Duke of America, a man who embodied the spirit of the classic cowboy, forever linked to his gun and wide-brimmed hat as symbols of honor duty and patriotism. On the other side stood Steve McQueen, the most adored rebel of a new generation, a man who had no regard for tradition, who smoked cigarettes on live television, wore sunglasses even during press conferences, and was willing to topple any idol, even the one named John Wayne. The 2 men had never shared the screen together. But precisely because of that, their clash erupted even more fiercely broadcast nationwide, right in front of millions of viewers. On the evening of May 12, 1972, The Dick Cavett Show aired live from Los Angeles. McQueen was invited as the special guest to discuss his film, The Getaway. After a few light opening questions, Cavett suddenly raised a sensitive topic. What do you think of the old screen icons, like John Wayne, for instance? McQueen, his face calm yet tinged with arrogance, smirked and replied, "If being a man means dressing like a cowboy, carrying a gun, and preaching about honor, then I'd rather be some bastard roaming the streets." The audience burst into laughter, but the camera director immediately cut to a wide shot showing several guest faces that had lost all trace of amusement. Everyone understood what had just happened. McQueen had publicly slapped the face of a living American icon, John Wayne. Only 2 days later, the Duke appeared on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. He did not mince words. When Carson asked directly about McQueen's remark, Wayne clenched his fist on the leather armrest, paused for a few seconds, then replied in a gravelly voice that seemed to grind through his teeth, "I fought for the real America. I saw with my own eyes my comrades fall at Saipan and Okinawa. And him, he fights only to keep his fake tough guy image polished for the camera. If that is what Hollywood calls a man, then we are moving backward." The words exploded like a ticking bomb. In less than 48 hours, conservative newspapers across the country ran stories about the decline of masculinity in modern Hollywood. And at the center of the storm were just 2 names, McQueen, the embodiment of rebellion, and Wayne, the traditional icon under siege. From that point, everything escalated without breaks. McQueen began rejecting every script with a whiff of cowboy themes, or anything requiring Western attire. In a meeting with Warner Bros., he flatly declared, "I'll never play roles like Wayne. I won't pretend to be strong. If my character is afraid, then he must tremble. If he cries, the tears must be real, not some rehearsed performance of honor." Wayne was furious, but he did not strike back through film. He chose the media instead. Just a week later, the American Patriot Weekly, a paper he partly funded, published a 3-page expose with the incendiary headline, "Steve McQueen Traitor to the Spirit of America." The article portrayed McQueen as an old child who never grew up a man shirking civic responsibility, and someone who built his image by desecrating the legacy of those who came before. McQueen's rage flared. He did not respond in person, but sent a recorded statement to NBC where he insisted, "If refusing to serve in a meaningless war is called betrayal, then perhaps I never belong to Wayne's kind of America." The war of words dragged on for nearly 2 years, with neither man backing down. Every broadcast, every headline, every quote was like a knife driven into the other's chest. McQueen even hired a young writer from Film Heat to publish an investigative piece titled "Inside the Cowboy Lie," exposing dark corners of Wayne's past, his requests to defer military service, his failed marriages, and even recordings of racist remarks secretly captured during the filming of The Alamo. Wayne exploded with anger, immediately sending legal threats. But public opinion at the time had shifted toward McQueen, especially among younger audiences. To them, McQueen was the man brave enough to declare that the old empire was rotting from within. John Wayne still held on to his stature, but it was now in a world slowly receding into the past. A veteran Warner Brothers director recalled that during a pitching session for Last Gunman, when the producer suggested casting both Wayne and McQueen together as symbolic rivals of 2 generations, Wayne simply stood up, took his hat, and said, "I won't stand alongside a man who spits on the legacy I've spent my whole life building." There was no handshake, no reconciliation, not a single behind-the-scenes meeting. Only bitter avoidance and a cold silence that endured until the very end of their lives. And the next story was about a victim of words so cold they shattered the most delicate heart in Hollywood. Audrey Hepburn, the gentle muse of an entire generation, once had to be hospitalized because of a single remark from McQueen, a remark that haunted her so deeply she refused to work with any male actor who carried the same demeanor as Steve McQueen for the rest of her career. 5. Audrey Hepburn. When the wounds cut so deep, they led to hospitalization. At the end of 1973, as Hollywood was busy preparing for what was considered the most competitive film season of the decade, Paramount Studios quietly launched an ambitious psychological project titled The Garden of Glass. Within the industry, the screenplay was described as a sorrowful symphony of the European urban soul. Director Paul Zimmer had nurtured the project for 5 years, aiming straight for the Academy Award for Best Picture. And the lead female role was tailor-made for none other than Audrey Hepburn, the woman whose mere presence on screen was enough to make the world believe that kindness and purity still existed. But what stunned the entire film industry was the name chosen to star opposite Audrey Steve McQueen. The news struck like lightning. On one side stood the epitome of grace, elegance, and the ideal feminine image. On the other stood a wild, instinctive fire famous for his anti-hero roles and his defiant attitude. Audiences were bewildered. Critics were divided. The press was unsettled. They were like water and oil placed together. The outcome could only be either a miracle or a disaster. And then the unthinkable happened at the very first script meeting at the Culver City studio. As director Zimmer suggested, they rehearse a scene of a grieving husband and wife mourning the loss of a child. McQueen, who had remained silent until then, suddenly shot up, slammed his hand hard on the table, startling everyone. He stared straight at Audrey, his voice not loud but sharp enough to cut. "You don't know what real pain is. People like you only imitate emotions. You've never truly lived through them." No one laughed. No one dared to breathe. Audrey quietly stood, bowed her head slightly, and walked out. But everyone had seen it. Her eyes were already brimming with tears. From that moment on, their relationship plunged into a deep freeze. In the days that followed on the Santa Monica set, the tension was so thick it could be sliced with a knife. McQueen became curt and cold, often interrupting the director, and even brazenly altering lines mid-scene without notice. Audrey, as always, tried to maintain her composure, but the observant could see she was crumbling. Scenes were delayed, meetings canceled, and then A second blow landed in the form of a rumor: Audrey Hepburn losing emotional control on set, suspected of abusing tranquilizers. Worse still, Zimmer, the one who should have defended his leading actress, chose silence. The press needed no evidence, only a name and a sensational headline. Then, tragedy struck exactly 1 week later. On November 26, 1973, Audrey was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in an unconscious state. Medical records noted suspected overdose. Patient in severe psychological distress. A nurse on duty recalled finding Audrey slumped in an armchair at her apartment beside an empty bottle of sleeping pills and a family photograph. Immediately, people feared the worst. There was no official announcement, but whispers began to spread. Was Audrey hiding a pain far greater than she had ever revealed? And the answer came in a way no one expected. A police source leaked that 3 days before her hospitalization, Audrey had received an anonymous phone call from a man threatening to release private photos and handwritten letters unless she withdrew from the Garden of Glass. The investigation pointed toward a former manager of Steve McQueen. This individual had been fired 2 months earlier over financial disputes and was suspected of selling information to the tabloids in revenge. Public opinion was shaken. Amid the escalating scandal, McQueen appeared surrounded by reporters at a New York film premiere. When pressed about Audrey's condition, he shrugged, smirked, and said coldly, "I'm not obligated to protect anyone. If she's too weak to handle it, then she should never have joined the game in the first place." That single chilling statement was like the final knife driven into the virtuous image Audrey had cultivated for over 2 decades. But contrary to McQueen's intentions, it became the moment that woke Hollywood up. Within 72 hours, a wave of female artists, producers, and directors rallied in Audrey's defense. A covert campaign called Protect the Glass was launched, calling on studios to boycott McQueen's projects and demanding transparent investigations into similar incidents. Among the signatories were major names such as Jane Fonda, Shirley MacLaine, and Barbra Streisand. Behind the spotlight, another rumor spread like a hidden fracture. The night before her hospitalization, Audrey had left behind a suicide note. The letter, reportedly found by her son, was quietly tucked away. If it existed, it was never made public. But insiders knew one thing: after that ordeal, Audrey disappeared from film sets for nearly 2 years. No interviews, no award ceremonies, no contracts signed. And from then on, she set one uncompromising condition for every role: I will never act alongside any male actor without a transparent record of character. And Steve McQueen. He kept moving forward, accepting roles, gracing magazine covers, riding motorcycles, smoking, and preaching about truth in acting. But the industry knew after Audrey McQueen had lost something: irretrievable trust. And even more than that, a piece of his conscience. Debates still linger: what was truth, what was fabrication? But no one denies that this incident left a scar not only on Audrey Hepburn's soul, but etched deeply into the dark ledger of Hollywood's backstage in the 1970s. And while Audrey chose to retreat in silence, Kirk Douglas chose open confrontation. When Steve McQueen quietly stole a blockbuster role from him, Douglas, who had endured enough, decided to strike back. This time, it would not be a battle of words, but revenge fought with money lawyers and a recording capable of destroying McQueen's career in a single morning. 6. Kirk Douglas, the star, who was enraged by McQueen over just one remark. Among the many names that had crossed paths with Steve McQueen, Kirk Douglas was perhaps the one that left Hollywood both regretful and deeply unsettled. Unlike the fleeting emotional clashes or the hidden rivalries between other actors, the conflict between Douglas and McQueen was a full-scale battle. There were words of insult, physical blows, legal lawsuits, and above all, a cold, steel-forged hatred sharpened through decades of fame. In 1976, Columbia Pictures was preparing to launch The Blood Frontier, a modern Western epic of unprecedented scale with a projected budget exceeding $10 million USD. Kirk Douglas, the man who had carried Spartacus entirely on his shoulders, was the first and nearly irreplaceable choice for the lead role. Everything seemed settled until Italian director Anthony Mann unexpectedly withdrew after a stroke, and Columbia's marketing department began whispering that the film needed fresher appeal for audiences under 30. It was then that the name Steve McQueen, the rebellious figure who had famously turned down working with countless legends, was suddenly placed on the replacement list. At first, Douglas remained indifferent, but during a private studio meeting with representatives, a producer carelessly repeated something McQueen had said upon learning he might have to act alongside Douglas. "I don't act with old men who like to monologue as if they're reading Shakespeare. It's a Western, not Hamlet." Douglas first heard the remark one afternoon in June while filming Saturn III at Pinewood Studios. He merely furrowed his brow. But when his assistant confirmed that someone had indeed heard it firsthand, Douglas froze for a moment, then replied with a chilling calm, "That bastard really dared to say that." From that instant, the air shifted completely. On the evening of July 30th, 1976, at the Sunset Marquis Hotel during the annual fundraising gala of the American Film Foundation, the two stars happened to cross paths. No one could have foreseen what would unfold. Without a greeting, without a word of courtesy, Douglas walked straight toward McQueen, who was standing by the balcony with a glass of whiskey in hand and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Douglas's voice was cold as steel. "You think I'm washed up, don't you?" McQueen smirked, blew smoke directly into his face and sneered. "I think you'd be better off doing skin cream commercials. More fitting for your age." In an instant, Douglas shoved McQueen hard in the shoulder, sending the glass crashing onto the marble floor. McQueen sprang up, shoving back. Chairs toppled. Shouts rang out. Two men who had once stood at the very pinnacle of Hollywood lunged at each other like wild beasts. A punch landed squarely on Douglas's jaw. He fell, but instantly rose, grabbing McQueen by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Security scrambled to pull them apart, but before order could be restored, the worst had already happened. The entire brawl, from the glares to the fists to the ripping of shirts, had been caught on security cameras. Somehow, by the next morning, the footage aired on ABC News, complete with the sensational headline, "Two Hollywood icons brawl over insulted honor." That explosion was the opening shot of a public war unlike anything Hollywood had seen. Douglas wasted no time striking back. He hired a PR team specializing in digging up graves. Within a week, tabloids from Sunset Weekly to Hollywood Mirror to even People magazine ran exposés. McQueen had allegedly been investigated for assaulting girlfriends, trashing hotel rooms, and even slapping a female co-star simply because a scene had gone wrong. McQueen countered in his own way, outwardly silent, but quietly retaliating. He reached out to a freelance writer who bore a grudge against Douglas, the same writer who had once penned an unauthorized biography of him. The result was a venomous article in Film Heat titled "Behind Spartacus, Kirk Douglas slept with a magazine editor in exchange for glowing reviews." No sources, no evidence. But the public didn't care. The rumor spread like wildfire. Douglas was furious. In a searing interview with the New York Times, he snapped, "I starred in Spartacus. And that kid. What has he played? A guy who drives cars, smokes, kills people, and squints film after film. And as for acting, sorry, he doesn't even know what inner life means." By late August, the feud had spun out of control. Kirk Douglas officially filed a lawsuit accusing McQueen of slander and defamation. McQueen immediately countersued, claiming Douglas had obstructed his career opportunities and abused media power. The California courts refused to hold a public trial, but the press already had enough fodder to turn the lawsuits into the biggest spectacle of that autumn. In the end, the Blood Frontier was permanently canceled. Columbia lost over $5 million USD in sunk costs. An anonymous executive bitterly told Variety, "We wanted to make a movie, not clean up the wreckage of two egos bigger than our studio budget." And so, both legends sank into the shadows of their careers. McQueen retreated to Mexico, living quietly, refusing interviews and taking no new roles. Douglas turned to the Paris stage, steering clear of American film projects. They never looked each other in the eye again. No reconciliation, no forgiveness. When Steve McQueen died in 1980, a CBS reporter asked Douglas if he wished to offer any farewell words to his former rival. Douglas stared straight into the camera eyes, unblinking farewell to what I never really knew the man. 7. Bruce Lee, when admiration turned into disappointment. Among the many names that ever clashed with Steve McQueen, Bruce Lee is perhaps the one that surprised people the most. To the public, they had once been like brothers. One was the rising martial arts star, desperate to leave his mark on Hollywood. The other was the king of cool, the man everyone believed Lee admired. Yet behind the camera flashes and the smiles on glossy magazine covers, their relationship slowly soured into bitterness. In 1969, when Bruce Lee had just begun his career in America, he became McQueen's private martial arts instructor. The two quickly grew close. Lee taught McQueen how to throw a punch, how to control his breathing, and how to carry himself with physical presence. McQueen, in return, opened doors into the world of movie stardom, even taking Lee along to parties filled with Hollywood's A-list. Lee once told his wife, "Steve isn't just my student, he's my brother." But soon enough, fame turned brotherhood into rivalry. In a 1971 interview, when asked about Bruce Lee, McQueen shrugged and said, "The guy knows his fighting, but Hollywood isn't a place for martial arts instructors. This is a stage for people who know how to act." That remark hit Lee like a kick to the chest. The man he had called his brother had publicly dismissed his worth. The tension simmered and grew worse in 1972 when Warner Brothers began discussions for Enter the Dragon. Bruce Lee earnestly pleaded with McQueen to take on a supporting role to help draw more attention to the film. McQueen's answer was icy. "I don't play supporting roles for anyone, not even friends." That disappointment cut deeply into Bruce Lee's heart enough that he confided to director Robert Klaus, "Steve doesn't understand. Martial arts is also an art form no less than cinema. The fracture between them would never heal." By July 1973, when Bruce Lee suddenly died at just 32 years old, McQueen was invited to the funeral in Hong Kong. He appeared in a black suit, sunglasses shielding his eyes, his expression stone cold. Witnesses said McQueen didn't shed a single tear. He simply stood silently for a few minutes by the coffin before turning and walking away. An old friend whispered, maybe Steve was afraid because for the first time he realized there were men cooler than him. Years later, when asked about Lee, McQueen gave only a curt reply. Bruce was a friend, but he wanted too much too fast. In Hollywood, that's what killed him. A detached, almost callous response enough to show that whatever brotherhood they once shared had long been buried beneath pride and ambition. If with Paul Newman it was jealousy with Elizabeth Taylor, it was insult with Marlon Brando. It was love with John Wayne. It was the definition of manhood with Audrey Hepburn. It was emotional pain with Kirk Douglas. It was honor then with Bruce Lee. Steve McQueen left behind something different, the wound of betrayal in friendship. When all 7 of Hollywood's greatest legends once carried within them a deep hatred for the same man, then surely that man could never have been just ordinary. Steve McQueen, a cinematic icon, a loner, and at the same time the very center of hidden battles, ruthless counterattacks, and spine-chilling acts of revenge that Hollywood kept buried in the dark for decades. So, tell me, among the names just mentioned, who do you believe truly bore the deepest grudge against Steve McQueen? Leave your thoughts right below in the comments and choose the name that sends the biggest chill down your spine. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be brought into the light, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of the next videos.